He was murdered by the men he called brothers, stabbed in the dark, betrayed for doing the right thing. Blood soaked into the snow as the life left his eyes. But death was only the beginning. This is the story of Jon Snow, the bastard who became a king, the man who died and came back. Winterfell, the great castle of the north, a place of warmth and honor, unless your name was Jon Snow. From the moment he could understand words, Jon knew what the world saw when it looked at him. Bastard, Snow, the stain of his father's honor. He sat at the Stark table, but never at the front. He trained with Robb, laughed with Arya, found kindness in Sansa, and endured the cold stares of Catelyn Tully, a woman who could never forget that her husband had brought another man's child into her home. But Ned Stark was a father to him in every way that mattered. He taught Jon that a man's worth isn't written in his blood, but in his choices. The lone wolf dies, Ned told him, but the pack survives. Jon believed that. He believed in family. He believed in honor. But honor had no place for a bastard. And so, with a heavy heart and a lighter burden, Jon Snow rode north, away from the only home he'd ever known, toward a wall made of ice and a destiny written in fire. Castle Black, a frozen outpost at the edge of the world, a place of criminals, outcasts, and forgotten men came to die. Jon arrived with dreams of glory, dreams that died the moment he met his new brothers. Thieves, rapists, killers. This was his family now. Except for one, a fat, bookish boy from the south who couldn't fight, couldn't hunt, and somehow couldn't stop smiling. Samwell Tarly, the man his own father wanted dead. In a place full of hard men, Sam was soft. In a world that valued strength, Sam was weak. Jon Snow saw something else. He saw courage. He saw kindness. He saw a brother. Everything before the word "but" is horseshit, Jon told him. And in that moment, a bond was forged that would outlast kings, wars, and even death itself. But the wall demanded more than friendship. It demanded oaths. Night gathers, and now my watch begins. I am the sword in the darkness. I am the watcher on the walls. I am the fire that burns against the cold, the light that brings the dawn, the horn that wakes the sleepers, the shield that guards the realms of men. Jon spoke the words. He meant them with every fiber of his being. He didn't know that soon the darkness would test him, and the cold would take everything. The first time Jon Snow saw a dead man walk, he didn't believe his eyes. But the corpse that tried to kill Lord Commander Mormont was real enough, and the White's blue, burning eyes promised something worse than death. Beyond the wall, the true enemy waited. But first, Jon had to survive the wildlings, and the wildling woman who would change him forever. Ygritte, red hair, blue eyes, a smile that could melt the wall itself. She was everything the Night's Watch warned him about, and everything he never knew he wanted. "You know nothing, Jon Snow." She said it 100 times, 1,000, every time he hesitated to kill, every time he showed mercy, every time he forgot that she was the enemy and remembered that she was something else. In a cave surrounded by ancient magic, they became something more than enemies. Firelight danced on her face as she whispered, two hearts that beat as one. Jon Snow broke his vows, and for the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to love. But the wall stood between them. Duty stood between them, and when Jon escaped the wildling camp, leaving Ygritte behind, he carried her arrows in his back and her heart in his hands. "You know nothing, Jon Snow," she said as he rode away. He never forgot those words. He never forgot her. They came over the wall like a tide of fur and steel. Thousands of wildlings, Thousands of free folk who wanted nothing more than to survive, even if survival meant killing every crow in Castle Black. Jon Snow stood on the ice. Arrows flew, men died, and through the smoke and chaos, he saw her, Ygritte, drawing back her bow, her eyes locking onto his. For one frozen moment, time stopped. She could have killed him. She should have killed him, but Ygritte couldn't pull that string. Not against him. Not ever. A boy named Ollie did what she could not. His arrow found her heart, and Jon Snow caught Ygritte as she fell. "Ygritte," he whispered, holding her close. Her blood soaked into his hands, the same hands that had held her in that cave, the same hands that had touched her face. "You know nothing, Jon Snow," she breathed, and then she was gone. Jon Snow screamed, not in rage, in grief, in the terrible understanding that love and war cannot coexist. One always devours the other. The battle ended, the wildlings retreated, but Jon Snow was never the same. They chose him. The men of the Night's Watch looked at this bastard boy and saw a leader. At 20 years old, Jon Snow became the 998th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. But leadership comes with a price. The wildlings were dying. Thousands of free folk trapped between the Night King's army and an icy wall they couldn't climb. Jon made a choice that would haunt him forever. He let them through. "Thousands of years," the old brothers muttered. "Thousands of years fighting wildlings, and now you want to make them our allies." Jon stood firm. "The true enemy won't wait out there while we squabble among ourselves. The dead are coming, and when they do, we'll need every living soul we can get." He didn't know that his brothers were already sharpening their knives. He didn't know that doing the right thing would be the last thing he ever did. "For the Watch." The words echoed in the frozen courtyard. Jon Snow felt the first blade slide between his ribs, then another, then another. "Traitor," they whispered, "wildling lover." Boy Ollie, the child who killed Ygritte, drove his knife into Jon's heart, the same heart that had beaten for the Watch, the same heart that had broken for Ygritte, the same heart that had tried so desperately to do what was right. Jon Snow fell forward. Blood pooled beneath him, steaming in the cold. His eyes stared at nothing, and for the first time in his life, Jon Snow felt no pain, no fear, no duty. Just darkness, just silence, just death. They prepared his pyre, they mourned, but the Red Woman had other plans. Melisandre of Ashai knelt beside Jon Snow's cold flesh and whispered prayers to gods Jon never believed in. Davos Seaworth watched with desperate hope. Ghost, the white direwolf, refused to leave his master's side. And then, breath. Jon Snow gasped. His eyes flew open. Air flooded lungs that had been still for days. He was alive. He shouldn't be alive, but death had spit him back out. "I was doing my duty," Jon whispered later, trying to understand. "I was protecting the wall. I was doing what was right." "Sometimes," Davos told him, "duty has its own reward." But Jon knew the truth. He had been given a second chance, a gift, a purpose he couldn't yet understand. And he knew exactly what to do with it. Ramsay Bolton had Sansa. Ramsay Bolton had Winterfell. And Ramsay Bolton was about to learn that you don't threaten a man who has already died once. Jon Snow rode south with an army of wildlings, northern loyalists, and desperate hope. Ramsay had numbers. Ramsay had cavalry. Ramsay had cruelty beyond imagination. None of it mattered. The battle began with arrows. It continued with slaughter. Jon found himself trapped beneath a pile of bodies, gasping for air, clawing toward light. And then Sansa arrived. The Knights of the Vale swept across the field like a hammer of the gods. Ramsay Bolton fled, Winterfell fell, and Jon Snow stood in the courtyard where he'd grown up, breathing air that finally felt like home. The Northern Lords gathered. They looked at this bastard. They looked at the man who died for them, and they made their choice. King in the North! King in the North! Jon Snow wanted none of it, but the North remembered, and the North needed a leader. Samwell Tarly sat in the Citadel, surrounded by books and secrets, and in one crumbling manuscript he found the truth that would shatter everything. Rhaegar Targaryen, Lyanna Stark, a secret wedding in the south, a child born in the Tower of Joy, a baby named Aegon Targaryen, hidden as a bastard to keep him safe. Jon Snow wasn't a Snow at all. He was the rightful heir to the Iron Throne, the son of ice and fire, the prince who was promised. When Jon learned the truth, he didn't celebrate. He didn't reach for power. He looked at Daenerys Targaryen, the woman he loved, the woman he served, and saw something new in her eyes: fear. Because Jon Snow didn't want the throne, but the truth didn't care what he wanted. The Night King came. The dead marched, and Jon Snow rode into battle knowing he might never return. At Winterfell, he fought beside his sisters, his brothers, his queen. Dragons burned the sky. The dead rose again and again. And when hope seemed lost, Arya Stark plunged a blade of Valyrian steel into the Night King's heart. The long night ended, but the war for Westeros was just beginning. Daenerys burned King's Landing. Thousands died: children, women, men who had surrendered. Jon watched the woman he loved become the monster he feared. "You are my queen," he told her, "now and always." But those were lies, and they both knew it. In the throne room, surrounded by ash and dragon wings, Jon Snow made his choice. The blade entered Daenerys Targaryen's heart. She fell. He wept, and the Iron Throne stood empty, forever changed by the blood of the woman who wanted it most. They sent him back to the wall, back to the ice, back to the place where his story began. Jon Snow walked through Castle Black one last time. Ghost walked beside him. Tormund waited beyond the gate. "You belong with the free folk, Jon Snow," the wildling said. "You always did." Together they walked north, past the wall, into the trees, into the snow, into the unknown. Jon Snow didn't look back. He didn't need to. He had spent his whole life trying to belong somewhere, to the Starks, to the Watch, to a queen, to a throne. But Jon Snow finally understood the truth his father taught him so long ago. The lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. He was never alone. He had Ghost. He had Tormund. He had the memory of everyone he'd loved and lost. And somewhere beyond the wall, where the snow falls soft and the trees stand silent, Jon Snow finally found what he'd been searching for his entire life. Not a throne, not a crown, not a title. Peace. Jon Snow died 3 times in his life. Once at the hands of his brothers, once when he killed the woman he loved, and once when he walked away from everything he knew. But legends don't die, they just go north.